Welcome back. For this video, I want to talk about the sample essay that I gave you guys, I think last week, maybe the week before. I know this is maybe a little bit late to talk about it, but I still think, since we're still writing these kind of essays, I know we've already submitted our short story one, but since we're writing, it's still a literary analysis essay, and we're still going to write more of these, and it's going to be the biggest part of our grade for the class. So I just wanted to go over this sample essay. If you remember, the title for it is Madame Emily's Wax Museum. As you noticed, it's about a story that we didn't read in this class. It's a story that I used to do, but I took out, and I think I was right to do that. Um, so you didn't know the characters or the plot of this story, right? But I think you could still understand what the argument was and what was happening here. I hope so, at least. So I hope that shows us something too about how to include enough summary so that a reader can follow what's going on, but with still focusing on the summary that helps your argument and that works as evidence for your argument. So I just wanted to go over a couple of things I think that this essay does well, and a couple that it does poorly. I think this was also a rough draft. It is only 3 pages. Yeah, I think this was a rough draft too, so this wasn't really a finished copy either. But I think we can get a few good things out of this. So let's start with the thesis. So if you look back at this, you'll see in the first paragraph towards the end, they say the story A Rose for Emily by William Faulkner shows the reader how the outdated parenting style Emily's father used directly affects the child with a detrimental cost. I think this is a pretty solid thesis because what it does is it goes on to talk about the parenting style of the character in the story and the relation between the father and the daughter and stuff. But what the thesis is that by showing us these things, the story makes a point about this kind of authoritarian parenting style. That the story shows us that, according to the story, this is like a bad parenting style that has negative consequences. Right? That is a debatable thesis about the story. It's not just saying, well, Emily's father treats her badly. That's not what it's saying. It's not saying, well, Emily's father is a bad parent who has a bad parenting style. That's not what the thesis is, right? Because that much would not be debatable. That would just be kind of a recap of what happens in the story. So you would read that and you'd say, well, yes, that's true, but it's not really an argument. So by taking this next step, by going from the specifics of what happens in the story and the characters and stuff to the more general point about parenting styles themselves, you get a debatable thesis about the message the story's sending. I hope that makes sense. Please let me know if it doesn't, because it's very important for what we're doing with this class. Okay, so some other things that I think work here. I'm not so interested in whether or not this person's right or their argument is good, but I want to look at just kind of some like mechanical things about writing this sort of essay that I think they do either good or bad. Okay, so I'm looking at the bottom of the first page now. They have a quote here, and I just want to read the sentence before the quote and sentence after the quote, and I'll read the quote too. Because I think they do a good job of getting the quote in there. I think I might have talked briefly about the idea of introducing a quote and explaining a quote. So I want to see how this person does it. They say, with this adding to what Faulkner described with how the father acted. So that sentence is a little confusing. I think it makes more sense with the one before it, but they're still saying, like, I'm going to tell you how the father acted, right? So that's their way of introducing it. And the quote, Miss Emily, a slender figure in white in the background, her father, a spraddled silhouette in the foreground, his back to her, and clutching a horsewhip, the two of them framed by the back-flung door. And then that's the end of the quote. The father is portrayed as an authoritarian parent, and Emily a submissive afterthought. So I think that they do a good job explaining the quote here. Maybe the introduction of it could have used some work. That sentence was kind of confusing. But the way they explain it here, they connect the specifics of the quote back to their argument, right? They say that that quote shows the father being an authoritarian and Emily being submissive, right? Which connects back to their argument, which is that, the father uses this kind of parenting style and the story shows us that it's bad, right? That's the way I've been framing so much of talking about the thesis. Like, the topic that the thing that the story is about, is it showing us to be good or bad? Is it endorsing or is it criticizing? Does it reinforce the ideology or does it undermine the ideology? Right? These are all different ways of saying the same thing. So yeah, I think that was a decent job of explaining the quote here. And again, the main thing is that we want to take whatever quote we have, whatever evidence that we have, we want to connect it back to the thesis, back to the argument, so that the audience can see why the evidence that we're giving them should make them more convinced, right? If we're persuading them, we need to connect the evidence to the argument. Okay, so another thing that I think they do good here. So obviously, since they're talking about like parenting styles and stuff, they needed to have research about that. And this goes back to something I said in the video about research and citations. That one of the main ways you can do research is find like more general articles that are just about the topic that you're writing about, and then try to apply it to the story that you're talking about. So they say here, this is on the second page, like the third sentence in. They say common side effects of I think these are side effects of having an authoritarian parent or something. It says common side effects are being socially inept, shy, can't make decisions, and anger. Emily displays the typical tendencies that a child raised with this would have. So what they do here is connect this general stuff about parenting styles to the specifics of the characters in the story, which is, I think, a good thing for thinking about how to do research for this. You can find other people writing about the story, which is always good, or we do it this way of having some info about the general topic and then applying that to the story. And then, okay, at the end of this paragraph, I think they have maybe a poor example of like when explaining a quote goes wrong. Let me see, where is it? This quote's really long that they have at the end of this paragraph at the top of the second page. I'm going to skip some of it. I'll just start from the middle of it. It says, a week later, the mayor wrote her himself, offering to call her to send his car for her, and received a reply in the note on paper of an archaic shape and a thin, flowing calligraphy and faded ink to the effect that she no longer went out at all. The tax notice was enclosed without comment. And that's the end of the quote, and the author goes on. She couldn't even, nor would she try to contact anyone outside of her wax museum. So this time I don't think that they explained how this quote relates back to their argument. It leaves me a little bit confused, and I'm just kind of like, okay, that was a really long quote, and I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to do with it, right? Because it's good to have the quotes, but they're only as important as your explanation makes them. The quotes are only important in that they prove our argument. So if they're going to be effective, we have to connect them back to the thesis. And then just another part, maybe they even state their thesis even better here. I think this is the last paragraph here. This author writes, he showed the reader, the author of the story, showed the reader that with the authoritarian style of parenting, there was always the same outcome. Children who can't make choices and are socially inept and shy. So yeah, I think that was them stating their argument maybe even better than they did at the beginning. So maybe they should have had something closer to that in the first paragraph. And maybe one of the reasons for that is something I think I've talked about before in my videos on introductions and stuff, that sometimes we don't really know fully what our argument is until we start writing the essay. So I feel like this person became more clear about what their thesis was as they wrote it. And I think that's maybe why the way they explain the thesis in the conclusion actually is more clear and makes a little more sense than they did in the introduction. So yeah, I just wanted to take a look at like what I think is a pretty effective thesis, and then how we can use quotes and the importance, I can't stress it enough, of connecting every quote that you use back to your argument and showing us how it fits in with that, how it proves your argument, right? All right, I think that's all that I wanted to say about this essay. We'll look at more samples in the future and try to get more clear on the different elements of this stuff. All right, that's all for now.